Threw a party for my big 35. Nobody came. Then Mom texted our 40th anniversary. You owe $3,200. When the text arrived, I was still scraping frosting off the side of a 3-tier cake that had barely been touched. My living room smelled faintly of vanilla and disappointment. I hadn't even opened the wine. My heels were still on, the curls in my hair still intact, my phone battery nearly full because no one had messaged. The silence had been its own kind of noise. I remember rereading Mom's message 3 times, blinking hard to make sure I hadn't misunderstood. The party hadn't even been over for 24 hours, and yet, here she was, unfazed, reminding me to wire her over $3,000 for a party I didn't plan, wasn't consulted on, and quite frankly, wasn't sure I'd be invited to. But let me start from the beginning. My name is Oprah Winfrey. My mother picked the name out of ambition or irony. I've never been quite sure. I'm 35 years old, a senior brand strategist for a content network based in Atlanta. I live alone in a 2-bedroom apartment downtown, filled with books I've actually read and plants I pretend are thriving. I have a soft spot for almond croissants, overpriced candles, and the illusion that if I just work hard enough, I can earn the kind of love that doesn't need to be requested. Growing up in the Winfrey household was like walking a tightrope across a chandelier, sparkling on the outside, fragile underneath. My mother, Celia, was a master of Southern grace with a sharpness that could slice a room in half. My father, Gregory, was quieter, harder to place emotionally, like an old photograph that had faded around the edges. My older brother Jonah was the golden boy, the firstborn, the prototype they never stopped polishing. My younger sister Vivian was the delicate one, the self-proclaimed empath, always too exhausted to help, but somehow always at the center of the room. And me, I was the achiever, the fixer, the one who was always too much, but never quite enough. I left home at 17 on a scholarship to NYU, then built my career brick by strategic brick. Promotions, pitch wins, brand turnarounds. My resume read like a corporate success story, but my personal life remained entangled in a family script I hadn't agreed to. I tried, year after year, to earn my place as more than a utility player in the Winfrey legacy narrative. I covered unpaid bills just this once, sent flowers on birthdays I wasn't invited to, and flew home for holidays that ended in whispered critiques about my weight or the fact that I didn't bring a man. I had distanced myself slowly after a Thanksgiving incident 2 years ago, where my mother accused me of intimidating the family by discussing my work at the dinner table. I decided then that proximity without safety wasn't love, it was performance. So I stepped back. Monthly check-ins turned into quarterly texts. The group chat remained unread. But turning 35 brought with it a certain ache I hadn't expected, a longing not just for family, but for acknowledgement, for the idea that maybe, finally, I'd done enough to be seen not as a threat or a disappointment, but as a person worth showing up for. So I decided to host a dinner, not extravagant, not showy, just intimate and meaningful. I rented a private room at La Rue, a French bistro where my parents once took us after Jonah's graduation. I chose that place deliberately, hoping to anchor this moment in something familiar and warm. I curated the guest list to include just family and 3 close friends. I sent invitations printed on ivory cardstock with handwritten notes, each one tailored to the recipient. I even added a quote on the back. At 35, I want to celebrate not just where I'm going, but who helped get me here. The RSVPs came quickly. Mom replied, "Wouldn't miss it." Sweetheart. Jonas sent a thumbs up emoji. Vivian texted, "So proud of you. I'll be there. For a moment, I let myself believe that maybe the frost between us had started to thaw. My friend Alana raised an eyebrow when I told her. You sure they'll show? I shrugged it off. They said they would. I'm just choosing to believe them, too. The morning of the party, I woke early, too restless to sleep. I steamed my navy wrap dress, ran through my seating chart again, and took a cab to the restaurant early to set up. I brought framed photos from childhood birthdays and carefully labeled place cards. I ordered everyone's favorite dessert. I even made sure the playlist included songs Dad used to hum when he thought no one was listening. By 6 p.m., everything was perfect except no one came. Not Mom, not Dad, not Jonah or Vivian, not even the plus ones they claimed were excited to meet me again. Not a single person from my family. I waited until 8:30 before I asked the staff to box everything up. I told them there'd been a mix-up, but the truth was written all over my face. On the way home. My phone buzzed, not with an apology, not with an explanation, just a message from my mother that read, Our 40th anniversary is coming up. The Grand Meridian Ballroom deposit is due this week. Your share is $3,200. We know you'll handle it. That was the moment everything changed. I stared at the screen for a long time before I put the phone down. Not because I was unsure how to respond, but because a response felt irrelevant. My birthday hadn't even cooled off, and already my mother was talking about linen tablecloths and champagne fountains like nothing had happened. As if the dinner I sat through alone, pretending the silence was intentional, had been a minor inconvenience rather than a clear and deliberate rejection. I didn't reply. I didn't call. I didn't scream or cry. I just sat there on my kitchen floor in a navy dress with frosting on my wrist, wondering how many more years I would keep offering chances to people who treated me like a transaction. I kept asking myself if maybe I'd done something wrong. Maybe they misunderstood. Maybe the invitations got lost, or someone got sick. But deep down, I already knew. The silence wasn't accidental. It was architectural. The next day at work, I wore a smile like a mask. People asked how the party went, and I nodded, said it was quiet, just how I wanted. I told them I preferred smaller gatherings anyway, but something must have shown through the cracks because by lunchtime, Alana pulled me into the hallway with that look she always got when she knew I was lying. Did they show up? She asked quietly. I shook my head. No one. She closed her eyes, like she was trying not to say, I told you so. Instead, she just exhaled and put a hand on my shoulder. You don't have to keep proving anything to them, she said, but I wasn't ready to hear that yet. 2 days later, a colleague named Maya from events stopped me near the coffee bar. I hope you're feeling better, she said with a sympathetic tilt of her head. I must have looked confused, because she added, Your mom called last week, said you canceled your party last minute because of a family emergency. She said you were really embarrassed and didn't want anyone to know. I felt the floor shift under me. Maya hesitated. She told us not to mention it, but I figured I'd say something in case you didn't know. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. My mother hadn't just abandoned me. She'd preemptively sabotaged my connections in case they dared show me basic human decency. She had erased me from my own story and replaced me with a version that fit her narrative better, unstable, dramatic, unreliable. I had heard versions of this story before, always from other people, always secondhand. When my cousin Darlene didn't invite me to her wedding, she later said my mother had told her I was going through something and wouldn't be attending anything that year. When my uncle forgot to call on my birthday 3 years ago, he said Celia had told him I didn't like to make a fuss. Suddenly, the puzzle pieces started to fall into place in a way that felt less like a revelation and more like a diagnosis. That night I sat on my balcony, staring out over Midtown, phone in my hand, not sure whether I was angry or heartbroken. I called my therapist, Dr. Renee Ellis, who had been helping me for over a year with what we then called career fatigue. I told her what happened. I told her about the party, the fake story, the text message, the feeling that maybe I had been gaslit for decades and was just now waking up. She said something I didn't expect. "You're not going crazy," she said. "You're seeing clearly." And that clarity always feels like grief at first. For the first time, I stopped making excuses for my family. I stopped giving them credit for meaning well. I started asking harder questions. Why did they always need something right after I had accomplished something? Why were my wins never celebrated but always monetized? Why was it so hard to recall a single moment of being emotionally safe in their presence without mentally editing the memory? The deeper I looked, the more the patterns emerged. They borrowed money after I landed promotions. They canceled on me when I was most vulnerable. They gave support only when it made them look good. Every gift had a string. Every compliment came with a clause. By the end of that week, I received another message from my mother, this time more casual. "Don't forget about the florist. The deposit is due Friday. No, how are you?" No mention of the party. No explanation. Not even a pretense of care. It wasn't a conversation. It was a billing notice. That's when I remembered something my father once said, back when I was 14 and asked why Mom didn't come to my school award ceremony. "She doesn't do small wins," he said. Adjusting his tie, "She only shows up for things worth dressing up for." It sounded normal back then. Now it sounded like a blueprint. I didn't respond to the florist message either. I deleted it. Then I deleted the previous message. Then the one before that. I scrolled back through our thread until I found the last time she had said something kind that wasn't tied to a favor or a lie. It was a birthday text from 3 years ago that read, "You're doing great. You'll make us proud eventually." I left it there like a sticky note on a fridge I no longer opened. The silence between us didn't scare me anymore. It was finally starting to make sense. That weekend, I pulled out an old shoebox from the back of my closet. It was filled with scraps of what I used to call sentimental clutter. Concert tickets, birthday cards, postcards from cities I barely remembered. I had kept them for nostalgia. But now I was searching for patterns, not memories. I wanted to know if I had imagined the manipulation, or if it had always been there, buried under polite handwriting and carefully chosen words. The earliest card I found from my mother read, "So proud of your spelling bee win. I told everyone at church you inherited my brains." Another, after I got promoted to senior strategist, said, "You're making a name for us. Just don't forget where you came from, at the time." I had read those lines as loving. Now I saw them as layered. I had never really been seen as my own person. I had been an asset, a vessel, a symbol of their parenting. I called Dr. Ellis that Monday and asked her a question I never thought I'd say out loud. Is it possible to be raised by people who loved your success but not you? She didn't hesitate. Yes, she said, it's more common than you think. And it's not love. It's control with applause. That sentence rang in my mind for days. Control with applause. That's exactly what it felt like. They praised me when it benefited them. They ignored me when it didn't. And when I resisted, they punished me through silence, shame, or exclusion. I started journaling again, not the aspirational kind with affirmations and bucket lists, but the raw kind where I could track my memories without editing. I wrote about the time my father used my scholarship money to pay off one of his credit cards, telling me it was a family contribution. I remembered how Mom told people at her book club that I had won a marketing award because her networking made it possible. I wrote about how, at 22, I gave them $5,000 for what they claimed was a medical emergency, only to find out later they had used it to upgrade their kitchen backsplash. Each entry felt like a tiny betrayal I had once dismissed as miscommunication, but could now name for what it was. The body keeps the score, and mine had been paying the interest on emotional debt for over a decade. I hadn't even realized how exhausted I was until I started sleeping properly again. I stopped answering my mother's texts, and with that silence came a strange kind of peace. For a few days, no requests arrived, no emotional landmines disguised as family updates. But then, as if on cue, she escalated. This time, it wasn't a text, it was a call. I let it go to voicemail. Her tone was tight, clipped, pretending not to be angry. Hi, honey, haven't heard back. The planner needs your payment by Wednesday. You know how quickly these venues book up. Let's not make this harder than it needs to be. No mention of my birthday, no inquiry about how I was doing, just the expectation that I would resume my assigned role in the Winfrey narrative, the reliable one, the provider, the good daughter with a good job and a good reputation, who always paid when no one else could. I didn't return the call. Instead, I took a walk through Piedmont Park, something I hadn't done in months. I left my phone at home and sat by the lake, watching people laugh with their dogs, couples argue about bike directions, kids feed ducks that didn't need feeding. It reminded me that life outside my family did exist, and it wasn't built on conditions or guilt. I found myself breathing easier, like I'd taken off a dress that was 3 sizes too small. I wasn't sure yet what came next, but I knew I couldn't go back to pretending. The performance had ended, and I was finally stepping off the stage. The following day, I received a group email from my father with the subject line, "Let's stay on schedule." Attached was a spreadsheet breaking down the costs of the 40th anniversary party. I was listed next to the largest contribution. There was no signature, no personalization, no question, just numbers. I stared at the screen and realized something I had never let myself fully admit. They didn't respect me. They used me, and worse. They expected me not to notice, or if I did. They expected me to stay quiet, grateful even, for being allowed to carry their weight. That night, I told Alana everything. We sat on my balcony with takeout and wine, and I laid it out piece by piece. She listened without interrupting, but I could feel the air around her tightening. When I finished, she leaned back and said softly, "They never showed up for the version of you that actually exists, just the one they built in their heads." I nodded, tears stinging but not falling. I think I've been loving the idea of a family more than the one I actually have. She reached for my hand. Then maybe it's time to stop funding the illusion. 2 days after the spreadsheet email, I received an invitation in the mail that nearly made me drop my coffee. It was printed on thick cream cardstock with embossed gold lettering and scripted flourishes. Across the top, in elegant cursive, it read, "Join us in celebrating 40 years of Celia and Gregory Winfrey's love, a special evening, generously hosted by their daughter, Oprah Winfrey." I read that line 3 times, my hand tightening around the envelope, not with love from or made possible by, but generously hosted, as if I had agreed, as if I had already paid. My name, my job title, my reputation, they were all being leveraged without my consent. The RSVP listed a hotel ballroom downtown, the kind with valet parking and a string quartet. My name was being used as a brand sponsor for an event I hadn't even been consulted on. And the worst part, some of my colleagues had already received theirs too. That afternoon, my coworker William leaned against my office door with a knowing smirk. "Fancy party you're throwing," he said. "Didn't know you were footing the bill for that kind of thing." I forced a laugh. "Neither did I said, and shut the door behind him. My heart was pounding. They had gone too far. They had announced my generosity before it even existed, manipulating the social pressure so I couldn't say no without looking petty or ungrateful. They knew exactly what they were doing, and for the first time, I knew it too. I called Dr. Ellis that evening, voice shaking. "They're dragging my name into it now," I said. "They sent invitations to my coworkers. It's not just family anymore." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "That's not just emotional manipulation. That's reputational coercion. They're creating a trap, so saying no feels like a betrayal of your image." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "They've always done this, haven't they? Just on a smaller scale. You're not crazy for noticing it now." She replied, "You're just finally refusing to play along." That night, I drafted a dozen responses. Some were scathing, some were polite. A few were almost conciliatory, but none of them felt right. Every version of me had something to explain, something to justify, something to soften. And I was tired of being the soft place they landed while pretending not to need me. So instead of a long message, I transferred exactly $10 to my mother's account with a memo that read, "That's all you deserve." Then I sent her a single text, "I will not be financing your anniversary party. Please do not contact me again unless it is to acknowledge the harm you've caused and show a genuine willingness to repair it." Then I turned my phone off. By morning, I had over 40 missed calls, some from my mother, some from my father, many from relatives I hadn't heard from in months. The voice messages started with guilt and quickly turned to rage. "How could you do this to us? After all we've sacrificed, you always were difficult. Your father is devastated. Is this really about a dinner party?" But none of them mentioned the birthday. None of them acknowledged the original betrayal. They were only concerned with maintaining the illusion, the version of me that paid quietly, smiled politely, and stayed useful. That week was a blur. My boss asked me if everything at home was okay after my father called his office, pretending to be concerned about my mental health. My building's front desk said a woman matching my mother's description had come by asking to be let up, claiming there was an emergency. I changed the access code to my unit. I notified HR of the situation. I kept every voicemail, every email, every accidental confession. Dr. Ellis told me it was time to document everything in case the escalation became legal. And deep down, I already knew it would. The hardest part wasn't the backlash. It wasn't the gossip or the awkward silences at work. It was the voice inside me that still wanted to believe there had been love underneath it all, that they were just misguided, that if I explained it clearly enough, they would understand. But the truth was, they understood perfectly. They just didn't care. They weren't confused. They were entitled. And entitlement doesn't crumble under logic. It only grows louder when denied. 2 days later, my cousin Darlene called me crying. I didn't know what they were doing. She said, "They told us you offered. that you were proud to do it, that it was your gift to them. I stayed quiet, letting her fill the space. They even said you were working with a planner directly. I'm so sorry. I feel stupid. Don't, I replied. They lie well, and they lie early. It's not your fault for believing them. It's theirs for making it believable. She hesitated before adding, they've been doing this for years, haven't they, to you, to Jonah, even to Vivian. I guess we just didn't want to see it. That night, I sat in bed reading old journals. One entry from 6 years ago stood out. Mom said I was selfish for moving out, that if I really loved them, I'd live closer. Then she asked for a loan in the same breath, at the time. I had written it off as a bad day. Now I saw it for what it was, a system, a machine, one that needed someone like me to keep running, but I wasn't oiling the gears anymore, and the machine didn't like that. It was a Friday night in early November when the pounding on my door started. At first, I thought it was the neighbor's kid, the one who always forgot his key and knocked like the world was ending. But then I heard the voice, my mother's voice, shrill, tight, sharp enough to slice through the hallway walls. Oprah, open this door. We need to talk. My heart sank. I froze for a second, unsure if I was imagining it. Then came my father's voice, low but commanding. You will not ignore us in our own city. This is ridiculous. My hands trembled slightly as I stepped toward the door, not to open it, but to engage the deadbolt and slide the security chain across. They hadn't called. They hadn't texted. They had just shown up, angry, uninvited, and absolutely certain they still had the right. I'm not comfortable with this, I said, loud enough for them to hear through the door. If you want to speak, it needs to be through a mediator or in writing. Silence. Then my mother snapped. A mediator. We are your parents. We don't need therapy to talk to our own daughter. My father chimed in. You're making a scene. What will your neighbors think? As if that was ever his concern. I glanced through the peephole and saw them standing there, arms crossed, as if they were the ones owed an explanation. Please leave, I said, steady but firm, or I'll be forced to involve security. They didn't leave. Instead, I heard the sound of metal brushing against the lock. My blood ran cold. I had forgotten they still had a spare key. I hadn't changed it since I moved in 5 years ago. I pressed my body weight against the door as the knob turned and the bolt resisted. Stop, I said, louder now. You're not allowed in. I don't consent to this. My mother's voice sharpened. This is your problem. Oprah, always overreacting, always dramatic, just like when you were a teenager. The door jolted again, but the chain held. I backed away, grabbed my phone, and did what I never thought I'd do. I opened the voice recorder app. Then I started filming. I'm asking you to leave. I said clearly into the mic. You are attempting to force entry into my home without permission. If you continue, I will call the police. I watched their faces shift through the narrow opening, from fury to disbelief, then something closer to panic. We gave you everything. My father growled, This is how you repay us. Recording your own parents like criminals. My mother's voice cracked. You've always been impossible to love. That sentence landed like a punch, not because it surprised me, but because she said it out loud, with witnesses, with intent. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just pressed the record button again and dialed 911 with my other hand. As the dispatcher picked up, I said clearly, "Yes, I need officers dispatched to my apartment. 2 individuals are attempting to break in. I've asked them to leave. They are not complying. One of them has a key, but I have not given consent for entry." The weight of that sentence sat heavy in my throat. Saying it out loud made it real. That finally got them moving. My father grabbed my mother's wrist and muttered, "We're leaving," but not before she looked over her shoulder and hissed, "This isn't over." "Actually," I replied, "it is." Then I closed the door, locked every bolt, and leaned against it with both palms flat against the cool wood. I wasn't shaking anymore. I was calm. When the officers arrived 15 minutes later, I showed them the security footage and the broken chain. I explained the history, the messages, the financial coercion, the manipulation. They asked if I wanted to press charges. I didn't, not yet, but I requested documentation and asked about a restraining order. They were polite, professional, almost too understanding. One officer, older, maybe near retirement, handed me his card and said, "No one has the right to make you feel unsafe in your own home, not even the people who raised you." That sentence sat in my chest like an anchor, steadying me. The next day, I changed the locks. I updated my building's security. I filtered my email inbox and set up a folder where anything from them went automatically. I told my doorman never to let them up again without written permission, and for the first time in my adult life, I realized that setting a boundary isn't just an act of resistance, it's an act of self-respect. I didn't need to explain. I didn't need them to understand. I only needed them to stay out. That night, I sat at my desk and printed out the documents required to file a restraining order. I signed them without hesitation, not out of vengeance, but out of clarity. It wasn't about punishing them. It was about protecting me. For years, I had been trying to earn safety through compliance. I had smiled through insults, paid through guilt, and tolerated silence as if it were mercy. But now, I understood something far more powerful. Safety isn't something you earn, it's something you claim. The restraining order was granted without resistance. I submitted the audio recordings, the texts, the footage of the broken chain, and a sworn statement outlining the emotional escalation that had led to that night. I didn't cry when the judge signed the papers. I didn't tremble when the officer handed me a copy. I just sat there in the quiet of the courthouse hallway, holding a document that formally acknowledged what I had silently endured for over 3 decades. It wasn't triumph I felt. It was confirmation, the kind that settles deep in your body when you finally stop asking if it was really that bad, and instead say yes, it was, and I will not let it continue. Word traveled fast. Within a week, the extended family fractured. Some called to plead, others to condemn. A few stayed silent, unsure of where to land, but a handful surprised me. My cousin Taylor sent a message that simply said, "I saw the way they treated you at Thanksgiving 3 years ago. I'm sorry I didn't say something then." My Aunt Myra, who always walked a tightrope between diplomacy and denial, called and said, "I never understood why you always look so tired. Now I do." The most unexpected call came from Jonah. It was late, almost midnight. I almost didn't pick up, but something told me to answer. His voice was softer than I remembered. "I got the invitation too," he said. "The one that said you were hosting the party." I figured it was another exaggeration. It wasn't just exaggerated. I said, "It was a lie." He exhaled. "They did something similar to me last year. Told the whole family I was buying them a new car for their anniversary. I didn't even know about it until people started thanking me. There was a pause, then a quieter admission. I took out a loan just to avoid looking like the bad son. Paid it off 3 months ago. I leaned back into my couch, stunned. Why didn't you tell me? Because I thought I was the only one, he said. And because I was taught that you were the problem. You were the loud one, the defiant one, the ungrateful one. And now I asked. Now I know they just needed someone to blame, and you didn't play along. We spoke for over an hour that night, not to fix anything, but to acknowledge it. He apologized, not with fanfare, but with quiet honesty. I should have seen it sooner. I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you, and for the first time in years. I didn't feel alone in the memory of what had happened. We weren't just survivors of a family narrative. We were witnesses to each other's pain. The night of the anniversary party came and went without incident. They had moved the event to a smaller venue, downgraded the catering, and shifted the story to make me the villain, according to Taylor. The new version was that I had suffered a breakdown, pulled out at the last minute, and left my parents scrambling. Some people believed it, she said, but not everyone, especially not after they saw how calm you've been, how grounded. Control hates clarity. I replied, it can't manipulate what it can't confuse. Work got easier. My apartment felt safer. I slept better. I started running again in the mornings, not to lose weight or prove something, but to move grief out of my body, one step at a time. I reconnected with old friends, reached out to people I had distanced myself from during years of emotional survival mode. I joined a support group for adult children of narcissistic families, where people shared stories that mirrored my own so closely it was both terrifying and liberating. I wasn't uniquely broken. I was just finally breaking free. Dr. Ellis called it post-traumatic clarity. The moment when you stop trying to rewrite the past and start building a future that doesn't revolve around keeping everyone else comfortable. You don't owe anyone your peace, she said, but you do owe yourself protection. And for once, I didn't argue. I just nodded, notebook in hand, heart quieter than it had been in years. 3 weeks later, I invited Jonah for coffee. We sat in a small cafe downtown, far from our parents' neighborhood, and talked like siblings instead of soldiers from opposite sides of a lifelong war. Do you ever think we could have a relationship with them again? He asked. I thought for a moment, then answered slowly. Only if they're willing to acknowledge what they did. And I don't think they are. Not really. He looked down into his cup. Yeah, me neither. But there was no bitterness in his voice, just acceptance, a shared understanding that love without accountability isn't love, it's theater. And we were both tired of pretending. That night, I lit a candle in my living room and sat with a journal I hadn't touched since my birthday. I wrote a single sentence at the top of the page. You are no longer required to carry what they refuse to acknowledge. I stared at those words, letting them settle into my chest like medicine. I didn't need closure. I didn't need revenge. I just needed truth, and I finally had it. Thanksgiving came quietly that year. No emails, no voicemails, no invitations wrapped in guilt or masked in false sentiment. Just silence. It was the first time I could remember not being included in a family holiday and feeling relieved instead of rejected. A few days before, Carly invited me to her Friendsgiving, a small dinner with a mix of coworkers, neighbors, and a few of her college friends who, like me, had complicated relationships with blood. I hesitated at first. I wasn't sure if I wanted to be around anyone, let alone people I barely knew. But Carly's voice was calm. No pressure. Just come as you are, she said. No expectations. No performance. So I did. I brought a bottle of wine and a sweet potato casserole my grandmother used to make, back when holidays still held warmth. The table was cluttered and imperfect. There were mismatched chairs and loud laughter and stories that didn't require editing. No one asked about promotions. No one made passive comments about weight or dating or whether I was wasting my prime. People passed plates and asked questions and actually listened to the answers. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was performing. I was just present, untethered from the roles I had been assigned by people who never truly saw me. At the end of the night, Carly raised a glass and said, "To the families we build, and the versions of ourselves we finally get to become." I smiled, not because it was poetic, but because it was true. I left her apartment that night, wrapped in a scarf and a feeling I hadn't known I was missing ease. I walked home through the quiet streets of Atlanta with my breath visible in the cold air and a sense that something was finally shifting. The next morning, I posted a photo from the evening, just the table, a few hands mid-toast, warm light, no faces, no captions that needed explanation. I wrote 3 words beneath it, family, by choice. That post reached corners of the internet I hadn't expected. Old friends messaged me. A few distant relatives commented with hesitant hearts. But mostly, it was quiet. Except for one message. It was from my mother. 3 days later, her email arrived. No subject line. Just the sentence, "I saw your post, so I guess this is who you are now." I didn't reply. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because nothing I said would change what she believed. Her words weren't an attempt to connect. They were a last grasp at control, and I no longer lived in that house, physically or emotionally. I focused on rebuilding what had been quietly crumbling inside me for years. I started writing again, not for anyone else, just for me. I filled pages with truths I had buried under politeness and professionalism. I mapped out emotional patterns like a scientist cataloging variables. I created new rituals, Sunday runs, weekly therapy check-ins, one quiet evening a week with no screen, just music and journaling. I reclaimed my space, not by changing furniture, but by changing what I allowed to take root in it, professionally. Things started to move, too. With the energy I once poured into damage control, I found myself more creative, more strategic, more grounded in the ideas I brought to the table. I wasn't seeking approval anymore. I was contributing because I had something to say. Clients noticed. My manager noticed. I was offered a lead role in an upcoming national campaign, one that aligned with my values and gave me space to mentor junior women coming into the field. For the first time, I said yes without checking how my family would perceive it, because their perception was no longer my compass. Jonah and I continued rebuilding. We didn't rush it. Sometimes we just exchanged articles or funny videos, but slowly. There were dinners, conversations that didn't avoid the hard stuff. We both started seeing the same patterns mirrored in different corners of our lives, and naming them made them less powerful. He still had one foot in the family dynamic, unsure how far he was willing to step away, but he no longer stood on the side that kept pretending nothing had happened. That mattered. By January, the silence from my parents had grown brittle. They sent a card for New Year's. No apology, no acknowledgement, just "we hope this year brings clarity." The irony nearly made me laugh. It already had. I met Dr. Ellis one morning over tea. She asked how I was coping with the distance. I told her the truth. Some days. I miss the idea of family more than I miss them. She nodded, her voice warm. That's grief, not regret. I smiled. I can live with grief. Regret was the thing that kept me stuck. That evening, I made dinner for myself, set the table for one, lit a candle, not because it was sad, but because it wasn't. I was present, fed, at peace, and most importantly, I knew I hadn't lost anything that was truly mine. Sometime in early February, I received a speaking invitation from a leadership summit for women in marketing. It was local, low pressure, but the organizer had been following my work and thought I could share something from the intersection of resilience and strategy. I smiled when I read that line. It was the first time someone had seen value not just in my skill set, but in the part of me that had been forged through endurance, through saying no, through not showing up when I wasn't being respected. The event was held in a boutique hotel conference room with about 70 people. Most were younger women just entering the field. A few were peers. Some were senior leaders, quietly looking for direction without having to admit they'd lost some of their spark. I spoke for 20 minutes about what it means to unlearn performance, about how much creative energy gets drained by emotional labor no one talks about. I didn't mention my family by name. I didn't need to. I talked about invisible invoices, about how strong women are often just the most emotionally exhausted, about how building boundaries isn't about keeping people out, but about keeping your integrity in. There was silence in the room after I finished. Then one person clapped, then another, and suddenly, the whole room was on its feet. Later that afternoon, a young woman named Mia approached me. She looked barely 25, but her eyes had the look of someone twice that age. Your story, she said. It felt like mine, not the details, but the shape of it. I nodded. That's how you know it's real. The shape is always familiar. She looked relieved. I thought I was broken. Turns out I was just breaking out. When I got home, I opened my email to find a message from my father. It was short. I heard you spoke today. I hope you didn't mention our family. Some things should stay private. I didn't respond. I forwarded the message to my archive folder titled Noise, a space where I put things that used to own me but no longer did. I poured myself a glass of water, stretched, and watched the sun set across the skyline, thinking not about what I had said, but how it had felt to say it without fear. Weeks passed. The silence from my parents settled into a permanent state. I no longer checked for it. I no longer rehearsed what I'd say if they suddenly understood. Instead, I invested that energy in mentoring young creatives, in helping Jonah untangle his own path forward, and in rewriting the definition of family from scratch. I started Sunday dinners with a rotating crew of friends, neighbors, and colleagues who had no shared blood, but plenty of shared understanding. We brought stories instead of expectations. We brought each other food and space instead of advice. Then one Sunday, Carly showed up with someone new, a woman maybe 10 years older than me. She introduced herself as Naomi. She had kind eyes and a quiet presence that immediately grounded the room. After dinner, as we cleaned up in the kitchen, Naomi stayed behind while the others drifted into the living room. I know this might sound strange, she said gently, but I recognized your name the moment I walked in. I raised an eyebrow. From where your mother? She said. She and my sister used to volunteer together at the hospital years ago. I met her at a fundraiser once. She mentioned you, said you were successful but distant, that you had abandoned the family over something petty. I stayed quiet. She continued, but tonight, watching you, seeing the peace in this space, whatever that story was, it wasn't the truth. I smiled softly. They never told the truth, just the version that kept them comfortable. Naomi nodded. You're not the only one who's walked away. But few have done it with this much grace. After she left, I sat alone at the table, letting the last of the candlelight flicker against the dishes. For so long, I had feared being misunderstood. But now, I realized something deeper. Being misrepresented by people committed to distortion was no longer my concern. My piece didn't need their permission. My story didn't need their endorsement. That night, I printed the talk I had given at the summit and folded it into a journal. I wrote one line beneath it. I survived the version of me they tried to silence. I closed the book, exhaled slowly, and felt, for the first time, that my life wasn't just a response to their harm. It was now a design of my own making. By mid-March, the family narrative had started to unravel, quietly, organically, without me having to lift a single finger. Taylor forwarded me a group chat screenshot from a cousin's birthday thread. It was my mother, typing in all caps, accusing Jonah of planting ideas in me and making the family look like abusers in public. Nobody responded, at least, not for 2 hours. Then finally, someone said, maybe we should ask Oprah why she stepped away instead of just assuming we're blameless. Another said, to be honest, she always seemed like she was holding a lot in. There were no defenses. No one leapt to my parents' side like they once would have. And that silence, that was the shift I had been waiting for. Not revenge, just the quiet crumbling of the illusion they worked so hard to protect. A week later, I ran into an old neighbor from our childhood street at a networking mixer downtown. Her name was Mrs. Patterson, and she was one of the few adults who ever treated me like a person, not a product of someone else's reputation. She leaned in gently and said, I always wondered how you were doing after you moved out. Your mom used to say you went corporate cold, but I figured, that girl always had a reason. I smiled, then said, turns out I was just protecting my peace. She chuckled. Well, it looks good on you. We talked for a while. Nothing too deep, but the seed was planted. People had started noticing the difference, not just in how I looked, but how I moved, how I no longer shrank myself in rooms where I once tiptoed. And they weren't hearing my side of the story from gossip. They were seeing it in real time, in how I carried myself, how I no longer let old wounds shape new decisions. Then came the moment I didn't expect. I was invited to speak on a podcast hosted by an industry colleague, a woman named Dr. Lacey Grant, who focused on psychological safety and leadership. She had seen a clip from my summit talk and wanted me to expand on the part about invisible labor and boundary recovery. We spoke for over an hour, but the part that resonated most came near the end. She asked, what do you say to someone who's afraid to walk away from toxic family because they're scared of being alone? I paused, then answered as honestly as I could. Alone is not the worst thing. Alone is quiet. Alone is clean. Alone gives you a chance to hear your own voice without it being rewritten by people who benefit from your silence. Her eyes softened, and when you finally hear that voice, you don't let anyone else speak over it again. The episode went live the next week. I didn't promote it much, just a link on my profile and a small caption for anyone afraid of choosing themselves. But it gained traction quickly. Colleagues sent it around internally. Jonah texted me, saying, I played that part about being alone 5 times. I think I'm ready. Even Mia, the woman I met at the summit, left a comment that said, I've never felt more seen. I didn't need to go viral. I just needed to speak clearly enough for the right people to hear me. Then, in late April, I got the final confirmation that everything had changed. A wedding invitation from a distant cousin. It was addressed to me only, not Oprah and family, not Oprah plus guest, just me. That might seem small to someone else, but to me it was monumental, because for the first time, someone in the extended family had acknowledged me as a full person, not just an appendage to the story my parents wrote. I RSVP'd, yes, not out of obligation, but out of choice, because I wasn't hiding anymore. I wasn't staying away to keep the peace. I was stepping back in on my own terms. The day of the wedding came and went without drama. My parents were not in attendance, whether by their choice or someone else's. I never asked. But I sat at a table with Taylor, with Jonah, with a few cousins who had stopped whispering and started thinking for themselves. And we laughed, not cautiously, not politely, real laughter, the kind that doesn't carry weight. No one tiptoed. No one asked if I was finally ready to forgive, because they understood, maybe for the first time, that forgiveness isn't something you offer to make others feel better. It's something you do to make room for your own life. That evening, as the party wound down and the dance floor faded, I stepped outside under the string lights and looked up at the night sky. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt whole, clear. For so long, I thought the goal was to make them see me, to make them admit what they did. But now, standing there with a full heart and a calm mind, I knew the truth. The real victory wasn't in being seen. It was in seeing myself. It's been 9 months since that birthday, the one where nobody came, the one where the silence spoke louder than any excuse ever could, the one that started with a fridge full of untouched cake and ended with a text from my mother that simply read, Our 40th anniversary is next week. You owe us $3,200. That was the moment something in me broke for good. Not out of rage or sadness, but out of a quiet clarity that only shows up when you've been pushed beyond every soft boundary and finally find the courage to build a hard one. I didn't respond, not to the message, not to the years of manipulation that came before it. I simply chose to stop engaging with a system designed to reward my silence and punish my independence. That one decision, silent, firm, unapologetic, shifted the entire landscape of my life. Now, 9 months later, I sit in a home that reflects who I really am, not who I was trained to be. The walls are soft beige. The kitchen always smells faintly of cinnamon. My Sunday evenings are no longer spent bracing for guilt or criticism, but shared with people who ask real questions and wait for the answers. My work thrives not because I'm trying to prove myself, but because I'm no longer drained by trying to survive my family. I have space now, space to write, to rest, to laugh without scanning the room for disapproval. I can speak a full sentence about my needs without apologizing halfway through. I can say no without rehearsing it for hours. I can celebrate my own milestones without inviting people who only show up to erase me. I don't pretend everything's perfect. I still grieve. Not just the parents I never had, but the version of me that waited so long for them to arrive. I grieve the birthdays I spent hoping they'd remember without being reminded. The calls I made after holidays just to prove I wasn't bitter. The years I believed if I was just better, nicer, more successful, they would love me without conditions. That grief doesn't go away. It softens. It stops controlling the room. But it never fully disappears. And honestly, I wouldn't want it to, because it reminds me what I survived. It keeps me honest. It keeps me awake. People sometimes ask if I regret cutting ties, if I ever miss having a family, and I tell them the truth. I didn't lose my family. I lost people who couldn't love me without control. What I've built since then is family, real family. People who celebrate my wins without shrinking. People who sit with me in silence when I have nothing left to give. People who never use love as leverage or affection as a transaction. People who don't need me to shrink so they can feel big. The difference is stark. The healing is slow, but the freedom is undeniable. Jonah and I still talk weekly. We're not rushing the rebuild. Some weeks we just send memes or funny videos. Other weeks we dig into the harder things. He's in therapy now. He says he finally understands why he always felt like a middleman, constantly trying to patch leaks in a sinking ship. He said something the other night that stuck with me. We grew up thinking love meant endurance, but real love feels like breath. I nodded and said, it took me 35 years to exhale. And maybe that's what this whole journey was really about. Not revenge, not proving them wrong, but learning how to exhale without guilt. How to show up in my own life without editing myself to fit someone else's comfort zone. How to live a life not defined by the absence of pain, but by the presence of truth. And truth, I've learned, is the most powerful form of peace. I still get messages from old family members sometimes, a cousin liking a photo, an aunt leaving a cryptic comment, sometimes even my mother, sending a chain prayer or passive remark, but I don't reply, not because I'm angry, but because peace doesn't beg to be understood. It just is, and I've chosen it, again and again, every day since I blew out those candles alone and didn't cry afterward. So if you've ever found yourself at a party where no one showed up, or in a family where love felt like obligation, ask yourself this: what would your life look like if you stopped trying to earn space in someone else's story and started writing your own? What if the real revenge wasn't anger, but peace?